One final night around the tree, one final cup of cocoa, and the conclusion of The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. We begin with Chapter 13, The Capital. Nutcracker clapped his little hands together, and when the Rose Lake began to dash louder, the waves rolled higher, and Maria perceived a car of shells covered with bright, sparkling, gay-colored jewels moving toward them in the distance, drawn by two golden-scaled dolphins. 12 of the loveliest little Moors, with caps and aprons braided of hummingbirds' feathers, leapt upon the shore, and carried first Maria and then Nutcracker with a soft, gliding step over the waves, and placed them in a car which straightway began to move across the lake. Ah, how delightful it was as Maria sailed along, with the rosy air and rosy waves breathing and dashing around her. The two golden-scaled dolphins raised up their heads and spouted clear, crystal streams out of their nose, high, high in the air, which fell down again in 1,000 quivering, flashing rainbows, and it seemed as if two small silver voices sang out, "Who sails upon the rosy lake? The little fairy, awake, awake. Music and song, bim, bim. Fishes, sim, sim. Swans, tweet, tweet. Birds, whiz, whiz. Breezes rustling, ringing, singing, blowing. A fairy over the waves is going. Rosy billows murmuring, playing, dashing, ooling the air. Roll along, along." But the singing of the falling fountains did not seem to please the 12 little Moors who were seated up behind the car, for they shook their parasols so hard the palm leaves of which they were made of rattled and clattered, and they stamped with their feet in a strange time and sang, "Clap and clip and clap, backward and forward, up and down." "Moors are a merry folk," said Nutcracker, somewhat disturbed, "but they will make the whole lake rebellious." And very soon there arose a confused din of strange voices, which seemed to float in the sea and in the air, but Maria did not heed them, for she was gazing in the sweet-scented rosy waves, of which the face of the charming little maiden smiled up upon her. "Ah!" she cried joyfully, and struck her hands together. "Look, look, dear Master Drosselmeyer, there is Princess Pirlipat down in the water. Oh, how sweetly she smiles upon me." The Nutcracker sighed sorrowfully. "Oh, kindest Miss Stahlbaum, that is not the princess. It is you. You. It is your own lovely face that smiles so sweetly out of Rose Lake." Upon this, Maria drew her head back very quickly and put her hands before her face and blushed very much. At this she was lifted out of the car by the 12 Moors and carried to shore. They now found themselves in a thicket which was perhaps more beautiful even than the Christmas wood. It was so bright and sparkling. What was the most wonderful in it were the strange fruits that hung about the trees, which were not only curiously colored, but also gave out every kind of sweet odor. "We are now in Sweetmeat Grove," said Nutcracker, "but yonder is the capital." And what a sight! How can I venture, dear listeners, to describe the beauty and splendor of the city which now lay before Maria, upon the broad, flowery meadow before them? Not only did the walls and towers glitter with the gayest colors, but the style of the buildings was like nothing else that is to be found in the world. Instead of roofs, the houses had diadems set upon them, braided and twisted in the daintiest manner, and the towers were crowned with variegated trellis works and hung with the festoons most beautiful that were ever seen. As they passed through the gate, which looked as if it were built of macaroons and candied fruit, silver soldiers presented arms, and a little man in a brocade dress threw himself upon Nutcracker's neck with the words, "Welcome, best prince, Welcome to Confectionville." Maria was not a little astonished to hear young Drosselmeyer called a prince by such a distinguished man, but she now heard such a hubbub of little voices, such a huzzahing and laughter, such a singing and playing, that she could think of nothing else, and turned to Nutcracker to ask him what it all meant. "Oh, worthiest Miss Stallbaum, it is nothing uncommon. Confectionville is a populous and merry city. Thus it goes here every day. Let us walk farther, if you please." They had only gone a few steps when they came to a great marketplace, which presented a wonderful sight. All the houses around were sugared and filigreed. Gallery were built over gallery, and in the middle stood a tall obelisk of white and red sugared cream, while 4 curious sweet fountains played in the air. Lemonade, mead, and soda water, all in the great basin where soft bruised fruits mixed with sugar cream and touched with a little bit of frost. But prettier than all of this were the charming people who, by thousands, pushed and squeezed and knocked their heads together, huzzaed and laughed and jested and sang, who had indeed raised that merry din which Maria had heard at a distance. Here were beautifully dressed men and women, Armenians and Greeks, Jews and Tyrolese, officers and soldiers, preachers, shepherds, harlequins, in short, all the people that can possibly be found in the world. On one corner in the tumult, it increased. The people rocked and reeled to be clear of the way. For just at that moment, the Grand Mogul was carried by a palanquin, attended by 93 grandees of the kingdom and 700 slaves. Now, on the opposite corner, the fishermen, 500 strong, were marching in procession, and as it happened, very unfortunately, that the Grand Turk took it into his head just then to ride over to the marketplace with 3,000 janissaries. Upon which a loner train came from the festival of sacrifices with sounding music, singing, "Up and thank the mighty sun," and pushed straight out by the obelisk. Then what a squeezing and pushing and rattling and a clattering! By and by a screaming was heard, for a fisherman had knocked off a Brahmin's head into the crowd, and the Great Mogul was already run over by a harlequin. The tumult grew wilder and wilder, and they had commenced to beat and strike each other, when the man in the brocade dress, who had called the Nutcracker a prince at the gate, clambered up by the obelisk, and having thrice pulled a little bell, called out 3 times, "Confesseur! Confesseur! Confesseur!" The tumult was immediately appeased. Each one tried to help himself as well as he could, and after the confused trains and processions were set in order, and the dirt upon the Great Mogul's clothes brushed off, and the Brahmin's head put on again, the former hubbub began anew. "What do they mean by confessor, good Master Drosselmeyer?" asked Maria. "Ah, best Miss Stallbaum," replied Nutcracker, "by confessor is meant an unknown but very fearful power, which they believe can do with them as he pleases. It is the fate that rules over this merry little people, and they fear it so much that the mere mention of the name is able to quell the greatest tumult. Each one thinks no longer of anything earthly, of cuffs and kicks and broken heads, but retires within himself, and says, 'What are we, and what is our destiny?'" Maria could not refrain from a loud exclamation of surprise and wonder, as all at once they stood before a castle, glimmering in rosy light, crowned with 100 airy towers. Beautiful nosegays of violet, narcissus, tulips, dahlias, they were all hung about the walls, and their dark glowing colors only heightened the dazzling rose-tinted white ground upon which they fastened. The large cupola of the center building and the sloping roofs of the towers were spangled with 1,000 gold and silver stars. "We are now in front of the Marchepane Castle," said the Nutcracker. Maria was completely lost in admiration of this magic place, yet it did not escape her that one of the largest towers was without a roof, while little men were moving around it upon a scaffolding of cinnamon, as if busied in repairing it. Before she had time to inquire about it, Nutcracker continued. Not long ago, the beautiful castle was threatened with serious injury, if not the entire destruction. The giant Sweet Tooth came this way and bit off the roof of yonder tower, and was gnawing upon the great cupola when the people of Confectionville gave up a full quarter of the city and a considerable portion of the grove as tribute, which he contented himself with, and went his way. At this moment soft music was heard. The doors of the palace opened, and the 12 little pages marched out with lighted cloves which they had carried in their hands like torches. Each of their heads was a pearl, and their bodies made of rubies and emeralds, and they walked upon feet cast of pure gold. 4 ladies followed them, almost as tall as Maria's Clara, but so richly and splendidly dressed that she saw in a moment that they were princesses through and through. They embraced Nutcracker in the tenderest manner and cried with joyful sobs, "Oh, my prince! Oh, best prince! Oh, my brother!" Nutcracker seemed very much moved. He wiped the tears out of his eyes and then took Maria by the hand and said with great emotion, "This is Miss Maria Stahlbaum, the daughter of a much respected and very worthy physician, and she is the preserver of my life. Had she not thrown her shoe at the right time, had she not supplied me with the sword of a pensioned colonel, I should now be lying in my grave, torn and bitten to pieces by the terrible Mouse King. View her, gaze upon her, and tell me if Pirlipat, although a princess by birth, can compare with her beauty, goodness, and virtue. No, I say, no." And all the ladies joined him and cried out "no," and then fell upon Maria's neck, exclaiming, "Ah, dear preserver of the prince, our beloved brother, charming Miss Maria Stahlbaum." She now accompanied these ladies and the Nutcracker into the castle, and entered a room, the walls of which were bright, colored crystal. But of all the beautiful things which Maria saw here, what pleased her most were the nice little chairs, sofas, secretaries, and bureaus with which the room was furnished, and which were all made of cedar or Brazil wood, and ornamented with golden flowers. The princesses made Maria and Nutcracker sit down, and said that they would immediately prepare something for them to eat. They then brought out a great many little cups and saucers, plates and dishes, all of the finest porcelain, and spoons, knives, forks, graters, kettles, pans, other kitchen furniture, all of gold and silver. Then they brought the finest fruits and sugar things, such that Maria had never seen before, and began in the nicest manner to squeeze the fruits with their little snow-white hands, and to pound the spice and grate the sugar almonds. In short, so to turn and handle everything, that Maria could see how well the princesses had been brought up, and what a delicious meal they were preparing. As she desired very much to learn about such things, she could not help but wishing herself right now that she might assist the princesses in their labor. The most beautiful of Nutcracker's sisters, as if she had guessed Maria's secret thoughts, reached to her a little golden mortar, saying, "Oh, sweet friend, dear preserver of my brother, will you not pound a little of this sugar candy?" While Maria pounded in the mortar, Nutcracker began to give a full account of his adventures, of the dreadful battle between his army and that of the Mouse King, and how he had lost it by the cowardice of his troops, how the terrible Mouse King lay in wait to bite him to pieces, and how Maria, to preserve him, gave up many of his subjects who had entered into his service, and all as it just happened. During the narration, it seemed to Maria as if his words became less and less audible, and the pounding of her mortar also sounded more and more distant, until she could scarcely hear it. Presently, she saw a silver gauze before her, in which the princesses, the pages, Nutcracker, and herself too, were all enveloped. A singular humming, rustling, and singing was heard, which seemed to die away in the distance, and now Maria was raised up, as if upon mounting waves, higher and higher, higher and higher. Chapter 14. The Conclusion. Puff it went. Maria fell down from an immeasurable height. That was quite a fall, but she opened her eyes, and there she lay upon her little bed. It was bright day, and her mother stood by her, saying, "How can you sleep so long? Breakfast has been ready this great while." You now perceive, kind listeners, that Maria, completely confused by the wonderful things she had seen, had at last fallen asleep in the room at the Marchpan Castle, and that the Moors or the pages, or perhaps even the princesses themselves, must have carried her home and laid her softly in bed. "Oh, mother, dear mother, you cannot think where young Master Drosselmeyer led me last night, and what beautiful things I have seen." And then she began and told the whole almost as accurately as I have related it, while her mother listened in astonishment. When she had finished, her mother said, "You have had a long and very beautiful dream, but now drive it all out of your head." Maria insisted upon it that she had not dreamed, but had actually seen what she had related, when her mother led her into the sitting room, to the glass case, took the Nutcracker out, who was standing, as usual, upon the second shelf, and said, "Silly child, how can you believe this wooden Nuremberg puppet can have life or motion?" "But, dear mother," replied Maria, "I know little Nutcracker is young Master Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, Godfather Drosselmeyer's nephew." Then her father and mother both laughed very heartily. "Oh, dear father," said Maria, almost crying, "you should not laugh so at my Nutcracker. He has spoken very well of you, for when we entered Marchpan Castle, and he presented me to his sisters, the princesses, he said that you were a much respected and very worthy physician." At this the laughter was still louder, and Louise and even Fred joined in. Maria then ran into the other chamber, took the 7 crowns of the Mouse King out of the little box that she had brought them in, and handed them to her mother, saying, "See here, dear mother, these are the 7 crowns of the Mouse King, which young Master Drosselmeyer gave me last night as a token of his victory." Her mother examined the little crowns in great astonishment. They were made of a strange but very shining metal, and were so delicately worked that it seemed impossible that mortal hands could have formed them. Her father likewise could not explain them at all, but he insisted that very seriously Maria should confess how she obtained them. But she could give no other account of them, and kept firm to what she had said, and as her father spoke to her very harshly, and even called her a little storyteller, she began to cry bitterly, and said, "Oh, what shall I say then?" At this moment the door opened. The counselor entered and exclaimed, "What's this? What's this?" The doctor told him of all that had happened, and showed him the little crowns. As soon as the counselor cast his eyes on them, he laughed and cried, "Oh, stupid pack, stupid pack! These are the very crowns I used to wear on my watch chain years ago, and which I gave to little Maria on her birthday when she was 2. Don't you remember them?" Neither father nor mother could remember them, but when Maria saw that her parents had forgotten their anger, she ran to Godfather Drosselmeyer and said, "Ah, you know all about it, Godfather Drosselmeyer. Tell them yourself that my Nutcracker is your nephew, young Master Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, and that it was he who gave me the crowns." The counselor's face turned very dark and grave, and muttered, "Stupid pack, stupid pack." Upon this the doctor took little Maria upon his knee and said very seriously, "Listen to me, Maria. Once and for all, drive your foolish dreams and nonsense out of your head. If I ever hear you say again that the silly, ugly Nutcracker is the nephew of your Godfather Drosselmeyer, I will throw him out of the window, and all the rest of your puppets, Miss Clara not excepted." Poor Maria durst not speak now of all these wonders, but she thought so much more. Her whole soul was full of them, for you may imagine that things so fine and beautiful as those which she had seen are not easily forgotten. Even Fred turned his back upon his sister whenever she spoke of the wonderful kingdom in which she had been so happy, and, it is said, that he sometimes would mutter between his teeth, "Silly goose." But that I can hardly believe of so amiable and good-natured a fellow. This is certain, however, he no longer believed a word of what Maria had told him. He made a formal apology to his hussars on public parade for the injustice which had done to them, stuck in their caps feathers of goosequill much finer and taller than those which they had been deprived, and permitted them again to blow the hussars' grand march. Aha, we know best how it stood with their courage when those hateful balls spotted their red coats. Maria was not allowed then to speak any more of her adventures, but the images of that wonderful fairy kingdom played about in her sweet rustling tones. She could bring them back again whenever she fixed her thoughts steadfastly upon them, and hence it came that, instead of playing as she formerly did, she would sit silent and thoughtful, musing within herself, for which reason the rest would often scold her and call her a little dreamer. Some time after this it happened that the counselor was busy repairing a clock in Dr. Stahlbaum's house. Maria sat close by the glass case, and lost in her dreams, was gazing at the Nutcracker, when the words broke from her lips involuntarily. "Oh, Master Drosselmeyer, if you were actually living, I would not behave like Princess Pirlipat and slight you, because for my sake you would cease to be a handsome young man." At this the counselor screamed, "Hey, hey now!" There was a clap and a knock so loud that Maria sank from her chair in a swoon. When she came to herself, her mother was busied about her and said, "How comes such a great girl to fall from her chair?" "Here is Godfather Drosselmeyer's nephew just arrived from Nuremberg. Come, behave like a little woman." She looked up. The counselor had put on his glass wig again and his brown coat. He was smiling very pleasantly, and he held by the hand a little but very well-shaped young man. His face was white as milk, and as red as blood. He wore a handsome red coat trimmed with gold, shoes and white silk stockings. His buttonhole was stuck in nosegay. With hair quite nicely powdered and curled, down his back there hung a magnificent queue. The sword by his side seemed to be made of nothing but jewels. It flashed and sparkled so brightly, and the little hat which he carried under his arm looked as if it were overlaid with soft silken flakes. It very soon appeared how polite and well-bred the young man was, for he had brought Maria a great many handsome playthings, the nicest gingerbread, and the same sugar figures which the Mouse King had bitten to pieces, and for Fred he had brought a splendid saber. At the table the little fellow cracked nuts for the whole company. The hardest could not resist him. With the right hand he put them in his mouth, with the left he pulled hard upon his queue, and crack, the nut fell to pieces. Maria had turned very red when she first saw the handsome young man. She became redder still when, after dinner, young Drosselmeyer invited her to go with him to the sitting-room to the glass case. "Play prettily together, children. I have nothing against it, since all my clocks are going," cried the counselor. Scarcely was Maria alone with young Drosselmeyer when he stopped and stood upon one knee. "Oh, my very best Miss Stahlbaum, you see here at your feet the happy Drosselmeyer, whose life you saved on this very spot. You said most amiably that you would not slight me like the hateful princess, if I became ugly for your sake. From that moment I ceased to be a miserable Nutcracker, and resumed again my old and I hope not disagreeable figure. Oh, excellent Miss Stahlbaum, make me happy with your dear hand, share with me crown and kingdom, rule with me in Marchpane Castle, for there I am still king." Maria raised the youth and said softly, "Dear Master Drosselmeyer, you are kind and good-natured, and since you rule in such a charming land, among such pretty, merry people, I will be your bride." With this, Maria immediately became betrothed to Master Drosselmeyer. After a year and a day, he came, as I have heard, and carried her away. in a golden chariot drawn by silver horses. There danced at the wedding 22,000 of the most splendid figures, adorned with pearls and diamonds, and Maria, it is said, is at this hour queen of a land where sparkling Christmas woods, transparent marchpane castles, in short, where the most beautiful, the most wonderful things can be seen by those who will only have eyes for them.